There are some betrayals that hurt because someone takes your money. Others hurt because someone takes your home. But the most terrifying kind happens when someone takes something much harder to recover: your credibility. Because once the people you love begin believing that you can no longer trust your own mind, every word you say can suddenly become evidence against you. That is what happened to Evelyn Price. She was an elderly woman who believed her daughter, Monique, was helping her through a difficult chapter of her life. Evelyn had no idea that the person she trusted to protect her would eventually be accused of telling others that something was wrong with her mind, placing her in care facilities against her wishes, and gaining access to money and property that belonged to her. And when Evelyn finally realized what was happening, she was no longer simply fighting to protect her finances. She was fighting to prove that she still had a voice. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the deeper this story goes, the harder it becomes to answer one question. When the person trying to control your life is your own child, who do you turn to for help? Evelyn Price had reached an age when independence meant more to her than almost anything else. She had spent decades making decisions for herself, managing her household, and building a life she could call her own. Like many older Americans, she understood that getting older could bring changes. There were doctor's appointments, financial paperwork, medications, and the ordinary complications that come with age. But needing help with certain things was not the same as surrendering control of your life. And Evelyn still wanted to make her own decisions. Her daughter Monique was someone Evelyn believed she could depend on. A daughter is supposed to be one of the people you can call when the world becomes complicated. Someone who can help you without taking your independence away. And for a while, that appeared to be the relationship Evelyn had with Monique. But according to investigators, the relationship eventually became the center of a disturbing dispute involving Evelyn's home, her finances, and claims about her mental condition. The first warning did not arrive like a dramatic betrayal. It came quietly, through paperwork. In 2019, authorities received reports raising concerns that Evelyn was being financially exploited. Investigators eventually focused on a quitclaim deed that appeared to transfer ownership of Evelyn's home to Monique. But Evelyn denied signing it. That single disagreement created a question that would become central to the case. How had a property belonging to an elderly woman apparently moved into her daughter's control if the mother said she had never agreed to it? There are few things more frightening for an older homeowner than discovering that the place where you sleep, the place where your memories live, and the property you believe belonged to you may no longer be entirely under your control. But the house was only one piece of the story. As investigators continued looking into the situation, they alleged that Monique had also described Evelyn as having serious cognitive problems. In reports described by investigators and news outlets, Monique allegedly characterized her mother as suffering from brain damage or dementia and suggested that Evelyn could not adequately care for herself. Those claims mattered because once a family begins believing an elderly person is mentally incapable, the balance of power can change very quickly. A relative who was once simply helping with errands can become the person speaking for them. A daughter who once asked her mother what she wanted can suddenly start telling other people what her mother supposedly needs. And the most painful part is that the older person may struggle to convince anyone that the story being told about them is wrong. Imagine being Evelyn. Imagine hearing people discuss your life as if you were not sitting in the room. Imagine someone saying that you are confused when you know exactly what you mean. Imagine being told that decisions are being made for your protection while you are desperately trying to explain that you never asked for those decisions. And then imagine discovering that the person making those claims is your own daughter. This is where the story becomes more than a dispute over money. It becomes a battle over identity. Because if everyone accepts the idea that Evelyn could not make decisions for herself, then every protest she makes could be dismissed as proof of the very condition she is denying. Then came the assisted living facilities. According to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, Monique allegedly used a power of attorney that had already been revoked to place Evelyn into assisted living and memory care facilities on 2 occasions. Prosecutors alleged that these actions were intended to help Monique gain control over Evelyn's financial assets. The first incident was especially disturbing because Evelyn was allegedly told she was going somewhere else entirely. According to prosecutors, Monique told her mother she was going out for ice cream with her grandchildren. It sounded harmless. It sounded like a family outing. It sounded like the kind of ordinary moment an older mother might treasure. But according to the allegations, Evelyn did not end up at an ice cream shop. She ended up at an assisted living facility. Think about that moment. Evelyn believed she was leaving the house for a simple outing with family. Instead, she found herself in a facility. The rules were different. The surroundings were unfamiliar. And according to prosecutors, Evelyn managed to contact someone she knew and ask for help. But the allegations did not end there. Prosecutors said Monique returned and instructed the facility to prevent Evelyn from using the phone or receiving visitors. If those allegations were true, then Evelyn was not merely being helped. She was being isolated from people who might have helped her challenge what was happening. And yet, the story contained something that would become critically important. Evelyn was eventually released. Authorities said adult protection investigators and medical professionals became involved and found that the claims surrounding the need for placement were not supported in the way Monique had alleged. Evelyn was released from the facility. For a moment, it seemed she had escaped the situation. But according to prosecutors, that was not the end. The second incident was even more alarming. Authorities alleged that Monique and another person physically removed Evelyn from her home and transported her to another facility. Neighbors noticed something was wrong. They reportedly saw a shoe belonging to Evelyn in the driveway and noticed that the front door of her home had been left open. That was enough to make them call police. That detail may sound small, but sometimes small details are what expose a much larger story. A shoe in a driveway, an open door, a neighbor who decided something did not look right, and a woman who was once again inside a facility she did not want to be in. Police became involved. Investigators intervened. Evelyn was ultimately released again. At this point, the story had moved beyond family disagreement. Authorities were now examining what was happening to Evelyn and why her daughter appeared so determined to place her under someone else's control. Then investigators began looking at the money. And that was when the story became even more serious. According to the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office, investigators reviewing Evelyn's financial affairs found an alleged total loss of more than $224,000. That figure reportedly included proceeds from a reverse mortgage taken against Evelyn's home. A reverse mortgage can provide money to an older homeowner, but investigators allege that the funds in Evelyn's case ended up in accounts controlled by Monique. Authorities also allege that credit cards had been opened in Evelyn's name and that numerous withdrawals had been made from her bank accounts. Suddenly, the earlier allegations took on a different meaning. The house, the claims about Evelyn's mental condition, the use of a revoked power of attorney, the assisted living facilities, the alleged isolation, and now more than $224,000 in financial losses. Were these separate events? Or were they pieces of one larger plan? That was the question investigators had to answer. Because money alone does not explain why someone would allegedly go to such lengths to convince others that an elderly relative could not care for herself. But if an elderly person's ability to make decisions is successfully challenged, control over property and finances can become much easier to obtain. And this is why elder financial exploitation can be so difficult to recognize. The person accused of taking advantage of someone may not look like a stranger waiting outside a bank. Sometimes the person is the relative who knows the victim's habits, knows where the important papers are, knows the names of the banks, knows the family members, and knows exactly which story other people are most likely to believe. Monique was not a stranger to Evelyn. She was her daughter. That relationship gave her something money could never buy: trust. But trust can also become dangerous when it is placed in the wrong hands. The investigation that began in 2019 continued. Authorities examined the property transfer, the financial transactions, the reverse mortgage, the bank withdrawals, and the credit cards. Investigators also examined the allegations involving Evelyn's placement into care facilities. And then came another important piece of the puzzle. The power of attorney Monique allegedly relied upon had been revoked. That matters because a power of attorney is not a magical document that gives someone unlimited authority forever. Its validity and scope depend on the document and circumstances involved. According to prosecutors, Monique nevertheless allegedly used a revoked power of attorney during the incidents involving Evelyn's placement in care facilities. If that allegation was true, then Evelyn's daughter was not simply helping her mother with paperwork. She was allegedly using authority that no longer existed. And that raises an even more painful question. How much of what Evelyn experienced was really about protecting her? And how much was about controlling her? There is a reason this story should make families uncomfortable. Most people imagine elder abuse as something that happens to someone else's family. They imagine a stranger committing a scam, an employee stealing money, or a criminal targeting an isolated senior citizen. But the Department of Justice has repeatedly warned that financial exploitation can involve relatives, caregivers, guardians, and people who have been trusted with financial authority. In some cases, the person closest to the victim is the person with the greatest opportunity to exploit that trust. For Evelyn, the allegations were not simply about dollars. They were about dignity. She was an elderly woman who allegedly found herself being described as mentally incapable while she was still trying to make decisions about her own life. And once that label is attached to someone, it can be extremely difficult to remove. Because what happens when you say, "I'm fine," and everyone responds, "That's what someone with your condition would say"? What happens when you say, "That's my house," and someone responds, "You don't remember what you signed"? What happens when you say, "I don't want to go there," and someone says, "You don't understand what's best for you"? That is how a person can feel trapped without being behind a locked door. The walls are made of paperwork. The locks are made of other people's assumptions. And the person holding the key may be someone you once trusted with your life. But Evelyn's story did not end in silence. Neighbors had noticed something wrong. Authorities became involved. Medical professionals assessed her. Adult protection investigators looked into the allegations. And the financial records provided something that memories sometimes cannot: a trail. Bank accounts remember. Credit cards remember. Property records remember. Mortgage documents remember. And when investigators put those records together, they can reveal patterns that a single conversation might never expose. The alleged loss of more than $224,000 became one of the most significant pieces of the investigation. Then there were the alleged credit cards. Then the withdrawals. Then the reverse mortgage. And then the property deed that Evelyn denied signing. Each individual detail could have been explained away. Together, investigators believe they represented something much more serious. In December 2022, authorities announced that Monique had been arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including exploitation of the elderly, organized scheme to defraud, conspiracy to commit an organized scheme to defraud, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and fraudulent use of personal identification. The allegations were serious, and Monique was presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. But there was another detail that made the story even more complicated. Authorities said an arrest warrant had been signed months earlier, in June 2022, and investigators had been searching for Monique. Prosecutors said she had moved to several locations, including Mexico, during that period. For investigators, this was no longer simply a family dispute over who should care for an elderly mother. It had become a criminal case. And for Evelyn, the woman at the center of it all, the emotional damage could not be measured by a bank statement. Money can sometimes be recovered. Property can sometimes be returned. Documents can sometimes be challenged. But trust is different. Imagine looking at your daughter and wondering whether every act of kindness had another purpose. Imagine remembering the days when she helped you and wondering whether she was genuinely helping or slowly positioning herself to control you. Imagine sitting alone after everything has happened and asking yourself a question no parent ever wants to ask. Was my daughter protecting me? Or was she protecting what she hoped to get from me? That is what makes this story so painful. Because Monique was not accused of targeting a stranger. She was accused of exploiting her own mother. And prosecutors specifically emphasized how difficult it is to understand alleged elder exploitation when the accused person is a close relative. There is another lesson hidden inside Evelyn's story. If someone suddenly begins telling relatives that an older family member is confused, incapable, or unable to manage money, people should not automatically choose sides. Concern for an elderly person's well-being is important. Genuine cognitive decline is real, and families sometimes have to make difficult decisions to keep loved ones safe. But concern should lead to independent evaluation, not blind trust in one person's version of events. That distinction matters. Because Evelyn's case demonstrates how dangerous it can be when one person's claims become accepted as fact before anyone independently verifies them. The allegations against Monique were eventually serious enough to bring police, prosecutors, medical professionals, adult protection investigators, and financial records into the picture. And that is perhaps the most haunting part of the story. Evelyn did not need everyone to believe her immediately. She needed someone to investigate. She needed someone to look at the documents. She needed someone to ask questions. She needed someone to notice that the story being told about her did not match what the evidence was showing. And someone did. A neighbor noticed a shoe in a driveway. Someone made a phone call. Authorities became involved. Investigators followed the financial trail. Medical professionals assessed the situation. And gradually, Evelyn's voice became impossible to ignore. The story leaves us with an uncomfortable truth about family. We often assume that because someone shares our blood, their intentions must be good. But family relationships can create trust, and trust can create access. Access to your home, access to your finances, access to your documents, access to your personal information, and sometimes, access to your reputation. That is why the warning signs matter. A sudden attempt to take control of an older person's property, unexplained withdrawals, new credit cards, changes in financial authority, a relative insisting that the older person cannot make decisions without allowing an independent assessment, isolation from friends or family, and sudden claims about mental incapacity that seem designed to silence the person rather than protect them. None of these signs automatically proves abuse, but they deserve questions. And Evelyn's story shows what can happen when nobody asks those questions soon enough. The case also reminds us that an elderly person's vulnerability should never be confused with worthlessness. Growing older does not automatically mean losing your voice. Needing assistance does not automatically mean surrendering your rights. And making an occasional mistake does not automatically mean someone else should control your entire life. Evelyn's story became a warning because the alleged betrayal came from the person she should have been able to trust. Her daughter. The person who was supposed to help her navigate old age allegedly became the person prosecutors accused of taking advantage of her vulnerability. And in the end, the question was never simply about how much money was allegedly lost. The deeper question was how far someone would go to make another person powerless. Because once people believe you are incapable of speaking for yourself, they may stop listening. Once they believe you cannot manage your own affairs, they may stop asking what you want. And once they believe the person speaking for you has your best interests at heart, they may never think to question the story. Evelyn's story reminds us that betrayal does not always arrive with shouting, threats, or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it arrives with a smile. Sometimes it says, "I'm only trying to help." Sometimes it arrives wearing the face of the person you raised. And sometimes the first sign that something is wrong is not the missing money, the disputed property, or the paperwork. It is when everyone around you suddenly starts telling you that you cannot trust yourself. So if there is one thing to remember from Evelyn's story, let it be this. Protect the elderly people you love, but never confuse protection with taking away their voice. Ask questions. Check the documents. Seek independent opinions. And when something does not make sense, do not dismiss it simply because the person involved is family. Because family should be where trust begins. It should never be where questions end. And as for Evelyn, the most important thing she fought to keep was never the money. It was her right to be heard. Her right to make choices. Her right to remain a person in her own home, rather than becoming a problem everyone else believed they had to manage. And perhaps that is why this story stays with you. Because the person Evelyn had every reason to trust was also the person prosecutors accused of putting her independence at risk. The daughter who should have been holding her hand was allegedly helping others decide whether that hand should still be allowed to make its own choices. And if that doesn't make you question how well we really know the people closest to us, perhaps this will. Sometimes the most dangerous person in an elderly person's life is not the stranger trying to steal from them. Sometimes it is the person who already has the keys. The person who knows the accounts. The person who knows the family. The person who knows exactly what everyone will believe. And the person who knows that if they can convince the world you are no longer capable of speaking for yourself, they may never have to answer your questions at all. So tell us in the comments. If you were Evelyn, and your own child convinced your family that you were no longer capable of making your own decisions, what would you do? Would you forgive your child if the money and property were eventually recovered? Or would the betrayal be too deep to repair? And remember, this story is based on a real documented case, but the names used here are changed for storytelling purposes, and the allegations described were charges and claims made by authorities, not a finding of guilt. The real case is a reminder that when an elderly person's independence and finances are at stake, the truth deserves to be investigated carefully. And if this story made you think differently about family, trust, and the people we depend on most, stay with StoryMind. Because sometimes the person standing closest to you is the last person you expect to have a secret.